everyone, welcome to Movement and Me, an initiative that is designed for budding artists across the world who wish to pursue their career in art. I'm your host Niharika, and on this show you will hear artists talk about their lives and the choices they had to make in pursuit of arts. We will also get to use some tips and key learnings from the lives of these artists, along with a detailed discussion on their areas of interest. So quickly hop onto a journey into the world of arts along with us. Today's guest is Miss Aadya Kaktikar. She's an associate professor at the Department of Arts and Performing Arts at Shivnadi University in India. She's an accomplished Odissi soloist with a career of over 2 decades. With a master's in teaching dance from University of Surrey, she's currently working towards her PhD in dance studies from Texas University, USA. She's also on the editorial board of JODE, which is Journal of Dance Education, and reviews for Ride, two of the most renowned dance journals in the world. Hi, Aadya. Welcome to the show today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and it'll be a pleasure to talk about some of the things that are closest to my heart and as we go along. And so let's go.
All right, so I'm going to quickly jump into the conversation here, and I'm just going to ask you, tell us your journey through dance. How did you get started?
Well, my earliest memory of dancing was when I was, I think, 3.5 or 4, and that time we had black and white television, and you used to have a program called Chitrahar, and I remember dancing in front of that and telling my mom, there's some song that Hema Malini was dancing in, and telling my mother that I'm so much better than her. And I was 3.5. And my mother said that you perhaps could be, but you need training. So she put me in dance class. I don't remember too much of my early years in dance class, but I think I've danced most of my life. It just happened. And what happened as I went through school and college and, everything else, I realized I ended up making decisions, personal as well as professional, based on really the question, will it allow me to dance? As I tried a ton of things in my life, but I realized I really couldn't do anything but dance. I mean, it was just an obsession. There was never a plan B ever, much to my parents' charge. And you know how Indian parents are like, you need to have a career plan, you need to know where you're going to be in 20 years from now, and you need to give them a sense of when you're going to be settled. And I didn't have any of that, but I have been very lucky in many ways, that I have got opportunities, even, I mean, simply by sitting and dreaming about them, things have come my way. I've had parents who did not know what to do with my dancing, but never stopped me from that. I come from a generation which did not have internet, and there was no Google search. There was no sense of knowing, just typing in and searching, what can I do with dance in higher education? None of that. So I was a science student in school. I decided to not pursue science-oriented careers because I couldn't dance. Then I was a commerce student in my undergrad. I decided to not pursue that because I couldn't dance. I did a journalism course and I worked with a magazine for a few months. And I was like, this does not allow me to dance. So I literally pretty much went through a whole range of things before I came to finding dance in higher education. But the one thing that has, and all through this, my engagement with dance has shifted from being a performer to a teacher, to a researcher, to a scholar. But the fact that that is what grounds me remains constant. That is the way I see the world, through that lens, that remains constant. But it's been a very, very circuitous journey. But I must say, a lot of people say that, oh, you've been a science student, then you did commerce, then you did journalism, then you did, I even tried my hand at English literature. And I was like, yeah, I like read, but that's not what I want to do. That's not really what drives me. Um, but a lot of people say that, oh, you've done so many things, you wasted so much time before coming to dance. And I realized actually I haven't, because the way I see dance today, it encompasses all of that. Nothing that I learned and nothing that I did was really a waste. Um, um, yeah, I mean, it all filters into what I do today and who I am today and the things that I can do and work with dance in the way that I work with dance today. So, yeah, all of this while I was dancing with my guru in Delhi. Um, for more than I have been with them for more than like 25 years now. So very intimate, close relationship with my guru while exploring all these bizarre spaces that dance took me to.
So you talk about doing a lot and working towards. You say something very interesting, and that dance sort of encompasses all of it, right? Can you explain a little bit about what you mean by that phrase?
So when I was a dance student in school, when I was in grade 11 and 12, a science student, I never thought at that moment that everything that I was studying as physics or chemistry or biology or any of that had anything to do with my dancing. It was as if these two worlds were separate. But in time now, I have come to realize that the way I understand my own moving body, in the way that I teach engineering students, uh, it's like I'm living the science that I learned in 11th and 12th. Uh, it's sort of uh, in the way that science was taught or even dance was taught at that time. They were like two separate worlds, completely segregated, have nothing to do. I mean, like arts and sciences have nothing to do with each other, which is not true. They all are fundamental to the human body. And so I found a deeper understanding of science when I came to accept that I live everything that I was, that it's in my body. I sense, engage with science and scientific principles and scientific understanding through my body. The same with commerce. I'm not good with numbers. Math is like a death sentence for me. Was like a death sentence for me. It still is. So my brain does not distinguish between 8,000 and 80,000. It doesn't. I can go wrong with a calculator and not save my life in the process. But I came to realize that I have an understanding of rhythm, space, and time, which is beyond the number system. Uh, and I came to this space of understanding of multiple intelligences, and the way dance allowed me to engage with that. Uh, so, really, I wish I had learned geometry in my body rather than having learned it on the paper. I am a kinesthetic learner. I learned that much later in life. Uh, when I think back to my commerce education, my education, I have a BCom honors degree. Um, today, the ability for dance to operate in the, like you said earlier, the entrepreneurship space or the market space. How do people make a living? This understanding of dance in the larger context of economies, politics, all of that again is something that I today realize that I did learn in my undergrad, but it was never, the connection was never made for me then. And I think if the connection had been made for me, it would have been a very different understanding of both dance and the subject matter at that time. So yeah, I mean, I used to hate political science as a, and I'm like, politics and is what I teach now. Um, so I wish that that meshing of subjects was done for me at some point. It took me time to figure that out for myself, but you fundamentally begin to realize that art forms which engage the body, which engage with humanness and the human condition, uh, are forms that embody all ways of knowing and all knowledge sources. It's there, and you operate in the world through that. But our somehow education system breaks it up into these silos, and as if they're divorced from each other, have nothing to do with each other. um, and Yeah, and so that's how I began to figure that none of everything that I had done so far, nothing was a waste, because I began to see connections much later, but I did. And that it I actually look back to my childhood years or my teenage years much more differently now. They're richer now for what I did do then. I did not pursue a science degree, but I'm richer in my understanding of dance today because of that as well.
Uh, that is actually very true, and I think quite informative. It goes along the same lines that you and I have been talking about for quite a while now. The idea of integrating dance with other areas and other subject matters, and the idea of disciplines sort of, uh, blending together and forming newer connections and finding new ways of engaging with the work. Tell us a little bit about when did you actually realize that you wanted to not just be a performer, but also get into the education space, do research, teach? Because I know that you're actively engaged in research work, you have published your own papers, you're also currently in the process of doing your PhD. So when did that shift happen for you from being just a performer or engaging with performance related aspects to going beyond performance to research?
So, for the largest part of my life, I thought I am the last person in the world who likes to study. I called myself a practical person, a doer. I used to be like, okay, just don't make me study, get me to do anything else. But reading, studying is something uh, I just cannot do. It's not me. And this was not too long ago. This was 8 years ago, not too long ago. But I came to teaching as a part of my training with my guru. As a part of training, I would teach junior classes. I watched him teach. I picked up some of his ways of teaching. We would have conversations about teaching. Uh, and then in 2010, I published his biography. And as he was talking about the biography, at one point he mentioned that he shifted to being a teacher very earlier in his career. And at that time, his elder brother, who was also a teacher and a performer, told him that, being a teacher takes more out of you than being a performer. You'll have to put the performer behind. You'll have to give far more of yourself. So are you ready for the responsibility? uh, and that is something that I now realize I inherently picked up from my teacher. uh, the joy that comes from seeing your students do better than you, the joy that comes from knowing that you've made a difference in someone's life, even if they never become a dancer, the fact that something you love has touched someone else's life. uh, so that was one, track that was playing, I think, unconsciously in my mind. Also, when I finished my undergrad, I was adamant on making my living through dance. I didn't know how. At that time, there was not that much opportunity. And before I completed my undergrad, I got a job as a dance teacher in one of the premier schools in Delhi. And I mean, it was hard teaching in school, you know that. But I loved that job. And I have students who I taught in grade two then, grade two, grade three. Now they are married, they have kids who have still kept in touch. Uh, yeah. And so they're not dancers, they have nothing to do with dance in their life. But clearly, there is something that passed between us that I get Teachers' Day wishes and birthday wishes from them every year. And these were kids who were in grade two. They were like, what, 10, 5, 10, 7 years old. Um, and that satisfaction, and I think teaching dance made me realize that I can connect in ways to people at an essentially human level, which a lot of other subject teaching did not allow me to do. I also realized that I enjoy that what more than enjoy, I think it gives me a great deal of contentment to be able to create that safe space where students can take risk with who they are. Uh, and so I realized and I mean, all of this is happening as I'm performing, right? I'm a performing artist. All of that is happening simultaneously. And then I arrived through some chance of luck or whatever, at doing my master's. Uh, I, I decided I was looking for a master's program that would um, somehow give me something beyond what I had, like a vocabulary beyond what I had. And that master's program really turned my life around more than 360 degrees. And I realized the capacity and the joy that I had for academic writing, reading, research, which I had denied myself because I probably did not find dance as an academic subject ever. It was so I had denied myself years of academic training and an assumption that I was not the brightest kid in class, because you didn't excel at maths or whatever. Um, and Yeah, and when I came to the master's program, I was probably the only. I was the only. I was their first Indian student ever. I was the only student that took in who did not have a BFA in dance. So I had no academic degree in dance, but what I had was years of being on stage. Um, and I realized the joy of academic learning. And in some ways, people find theory as restrictive. I found theory gave me a lot of freedom, a lot of vocabulary to voice the questions I had and the thoughts that I had, and to really extend my practice beyond performance. So when I do research, I would not say I am performing on stage, but I'm using dance in ways that I never thought was possible. Um, so, yeah, I mean, uh, a lot of people see this binary between theory and practice. I don't see that binary. I think I have lived that unification. How practice made sense or of theory for me. So yeah, I mean, um, it's been a very different engagement to a very I think I would actually say a fulfilling route to come in from being a practitioner to a teacher and a research scholar. I think it's almost like coming around a full circle. And I think it adds more depth to each role that I play.
I think I can see that. I can definitely vouch for that part. Uh, I have some very interesting questions. So I'm going to get started with the one that sort of brings in the idea of the multiple intelligences. So
Hmm.
you talked about this concept of multiple intelligences, and I remember this was written and introduced first by Howard Gardner. So can you tell us a little bit about multiple intelligences and whether or not you used the idea of multiple intelligences when you were teaching in the school, when you were teaching grade 2 and 3 students in the school?
Yeah, I mean, so basically, multiple intelligences, the idea of multiple intelligences is that instead of IQ or EQ being like a solid measure of intelligence, human beings have different kinds of intelligences: spatial intelligence, linguistic intelligence, numerical intelligence, kinesthetic intelligence, even naturalistic intelligence, which means that all of us have each of these intelligences, but to different degrees. These intelligences are, some of them are, there is a natural tendency to some, but they're all trainable. So, in the sense, for example, if you will see students who come from families with or parents with scientific backgrounds, where there's a lot of mathematical and scientific conversation in the house, tend to be better at the sciences. Um, in some ways, because there is a constant honing of that kind of an intelligence. So all intelligences are trainable to a certain degree, but we all have like a different matrix. So for example, like I said earlier, I'm kinesthetically intelligent, but I'm numerically completely unintelligent. So if you tell me, get me a piece of fabric that is 4 feet 39 inches long, I have no idea how to visualize 4 feet 39 inches. I don't know what that means. However, if you tell me, get a piece of fabric that fits the room, the length of this corridor, I can do it without measuring. I don't need a measure, tape measure. So this kind of, you will find people who get along, say, well, with dogs, others who naturally have a green thumb, naturalistic intelligence. They have a sense for those kind of things. So if we begin to realize that human beings have different learning pathways, then as teachers, we offer different learning pathways for students, or allow for spaces for different learning, for students to take different pathways to understanding the same concept. For example, I remember so distinctly in grade 10, when you have to give your board exams and you had to mug up that whole history and geography book. I'm very bad at mugging up. Like I cannot mug up. If I have to mug up something, what I realized, I even do it right now. I used to draw images, stuff alongside that. And and in my board exam, I remember I would first draw that image in the margin, and from that image, I can replicate the whole paragraph as it is, without mugging it up. But if you ask me to mug it up, I cannot, because I'm a visual learner. So if our education systems allow for the same concept to be engaged through different routes, then students can also, it's very enabling when you know how you learn. um, and it requires less effort, it's less painful, it's far more enjoyable for the students. So even with dance, I have figured, so while dance is like deemed as a physical activity, and you need to be kinesthetically intelligent in order to perform, there are aspects of dance which kinesthetically intelligent people can be, sorry to say, very stupid at. So um, if you are, let's say, uh, kinesthetically intelligent, you will probably make a good performer. But if you're spatially unintelligent, then probably it doesn't work for you to be a choreographer, or working with a group is not your cup of tea. If you are kinesthetically intelligent and you're a good performer, but if you're linguistically unintelligent, that you'll never be able to really talk about your work, or write an artist statement, write an artist grant, all of those things. You will never occupy the space of an art critic or an art historian, or those. So what multiple intelligences does is opens dance to this range of things, uh, than just kinesthetic intelligence and just performance. So over time, I have used this idea of multiple intelligences in my class to allow students to almost enter the same room through different windows. It looks different, the product looks different, but the room is the same. Whether if you come in through the door, if you come in through the window, you come in through the basement, you still arrive at the same room. Your processes and the way the room looks to you is different, but you're still engaging with dance. What multiple intelligences does is to enable every human being, or I think not enable, rather give every human being the right to express through movement. So
Uh,
it makes movement a fundamental right.
yeah, that's actually quite powerful statement, and I think that is something that we must all remember. And as an educator myself today, I struggle with the notion of trying to bring the different ways of learning together in a classroom. So I understand that it is actually quite a lot of hard work, but once achieved, it can actually bring out the best in your own students and empower them to take up learning at their own spaces in the ways that make most sense to them.
Yeah.
On this note, I have a question which is slightly a little more further in the journey. When
Mhm.
from your master's period, you said that you actually were able to form connections and associations, and you talk about vocabulary being one of the reasons why you took up masters in the first place. So, what is it about the vocabulary that actually intrigued you? And I do know that you also are someone who questions a lot, who's someone who's always looking, pondering, questioning, looking for reasons, ways, always logically thinking, and sometimes even creatively thinking. So, can you tell us as to what was the reason that drove you to do the masters other than vocabulary, and how did vocabulary play a role, and what is it about the vocabulary that you think was the most important part?
Right. I think as I was growing up, it, teenage was fine. You became a diva, you danced, and everybody knew you, and that's all that mattered at that time. You were fine. I mean, you were known, and that was the most critical thing at that point. But as you sort of come along, you also begin to grow as a woman, as a person, as a citizen. You come into a certain kind of a political consciousness that you did not realize, I mean, you did not have earlier, to be very honest. And you begin to have experiences, life experiences as a woman, as a person, that somehow feel distant from the art that you're practicing. uh, and I reached a point where I felt like my real life, like this person that I was in my real life, and the person that I was when I was on stage, were two different people, and that they were somewhere divorced. And I felt I had these two worlds living in my body, and these two experience. I was supposed to be a different person on stage, and I was actually becoming a very different person um, off the stage. And I what I did not have is the vocabulary to connect the two worlds. I did not know how to do that. I found myself in that moment of uh, complete disassociation from what I was doing on stage. The woman that I was expected to be on stage was not the woman I was anymore. I had moved away from that in my life experience. And while my guru constantly said that you draw on your life experiences to make your work and to do what you do, um, I did not know how. I did not know how, but I also did not know how to articulate and put into words or even thoughts the life experiences that I was talking about. uh, Today I can talk about this disconnect because I see it in retrospect. At that moment I did not know what I was sort of experiencing. uh, and I was looking for a master's program that would allow me to, I mean, I wouldn't have to leave the country, go out and just disappear, bail out of things, but would allow me to remain situated here, but also give me something of a challenge with things that I had no exposure to. So I really took a very big leap, and a fair amount of risk when I started doing that. I was so sure I would not be accepted because again, I really did feel, I mean, it's a very strange thing. I very rarely speak about it, but all through school and all through college, while I was a very well-known face. I remember college, I think second year of my undergrad, I was on the front page of all the major dailies in the country. I mean, you were making newspaper news and your face was known and all of that. But there was a fair amount of ridicule for not being academically oriented. I remember once one of our group of teachers got together all the 3 years. So the undergrad in India is 3 years, right? You like the BCom honors. Got together all the 3 years undergrad students and made them sit together. Picked up three people, asked three people to stand. One was me. The other was a girl who was a tennis player, sorry, table tennis player on the Indian national women's team. One was me, and there was a third girl, and she humiliated and ridiculed us in front of all the three batches. And she told me that you are here only to get a marriage certification. So that and many other things like that, uh, we tend to believe that people who are interested in the arts, who pursue the arts, are academically stupid. They are not academically oriented. We've done this. I've seen this happen to sports people. I've seen this happen to, and so I did tend to believe that I was not academically oriented. So I never ever thought I would get accepted into that master's program. I never thought I would get accepted into a PhD program. Uh, I never thought every time I read stuff I publish, I'm like, really? I wrote that? I don't think so. Uh, but it's in the way that we treat these students in school, in the way that we see intelligence. Um, that it's a different kind of an intelligence. And it leaves its scars when children are treated like that in school or even through college. So yeah, I came to masters because I had too many questions for which I did not have answers, but I did not even know what exactly were my questions. I had a sense that I needed to grow in a different direction. I didn't even know what I wanted to do. I didn't know how to articulate that. So I think it was that search that brought me to the master's program.
I actually have some very interesting questions, and I think these are questions that every other person who's ever thought of pursuing dance has ever faced. Number one, and the first and foremost thing is about how society treats you when you are trying to pursue a career in arts, and how an artist is considered to be somehow lower. I don't know, strata wise, I don't understand in which context an artist is considered to be lower, but we're definitely lower than in like an engineering position or like a scientist or IT profession, even for that matter, any of those professions, doctors, you name it, and there are there. So one of the things that I want to talk about is the kind of impact that arts actually has on the society and world at large, if you could talk about that. And the second thing is the part where you say that you wanted to go beyond just performance, and the ability to articulate what you're experiencing on stage and what you're going through off stage, and trying to bridge the gap between them. Because recently I have come across quite a few artists who are pursuing dance, who are professionally performers, and who are experiencing this divide, because we're living in a very politically aware space. Everybody has an opinion, everybody's forced to make an opinion, even excuse me, even if they don't have one. So
Right.
and even if you keep the politics aside, there are things that are happening in the world. For example, people protesting in Goa, trying to protect the trees, or the other areas, the other places that we are experiencing wars and other tragedies. So there's a lot of like there's a lot happening in the actual real world versus what's happening in your performance space, which may or may not be connected to what's happening in the world. So a lot
Mm-hmm.
of artists have come across and said that they are experiencing this divide, this break in reality and who they are as people. So yes, I wanted to talk to you about both of those aspects. Maybe we can start with the first, where we talk about what arts can do for the society at large and what role it plays. And then we can move on to the second part, where we discuss how we can try and find ways of bridging the gap between what's happening on stage and what's happening off stage.
Yeah, what arts does is I think it keeps us human. It arts are the ways in which we know, understand, and live our past to imagine a future. Arts is a place, whether it's music or dance or theater or painting or any other thing, um, that is sort of a fundamental. I mean, long before we knew the arts as arts, people painted and drew on cave walls, right? It's an essential human need. uh, iris- when children don't know how to draw alphabets, they still draw things, right? They make sounds, they move even when they don't know language. So the arts are, to my mind, the essence of the way human beings express their being in the world. Now, in time, we have evolved codified art forms, and those who like, if you're a Bharatanatyam dancer, I'm an Odissi dancer, I know the codified form that makes me an artist. But I believe that fundamentally all human beings are artists, in the way that it is a uh, almost like a DNA driven need to express. You may be a completely out of tune singer, but everyone will sing in the shower, uh, right? It doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need training. It doesn't. So what I mean, that why arts are important is that they remind us of our essential humanness. They connect us to that. That is one. The arts are also a very, very important repository of memory. Of, today you and me are not you and me because we are not this individuals living in a bubble. We have a cultural history, we have a biological history, we have a political history. And the arts in some way are like storytelling, is the way human beings continue to make anchor themselves in the world. Like, who am I? And the stories anchored you in who you are. This act of story making, telling, performing, and remembering is again an essential human community building activity, because you want to belong, you want to create identities, you need to know who you are. So a building or a bridge or a scientific innovation, it does not anchor you as a human being. It's the stories that we tell about each other and about ourselves, to ourselves and to others, that anchor us. The arts as we know it today are just codifications of those ways of telling stories, right? I mean, and different material you use to tell those stories, but that's what you do. And that's, I think, the core necessity of art is to remain connected to our humanness, and to ground, find an anchor, uh, and find your own story. That's why it's essential. It's nothing to do. I get very irate when people say, oh, if you learn the arts, you can learn mathematics properly. If you know how to dance, then you can teach maths through dance, or physics through dance. And I'm like, no, it's not a means to an end. It is the end. uh, in that way. So I get very irate when people do that. Because I'm not saying, it's like saying maths is the essential thing. This is just another method of teaching it. Uh, and I'm saying, no, this existed long before you knew maths existed as maths. We understood balance, force, torque, gravity in our bodies long before those words were coined. We know this in our bodies. and we sort of somehow take away this knowledge and put it in a textbook, and this becomes important, and what your body knows, and your bodily experiences as sense making and knowledge generating get sort of put aside. And that's why the arts are important, because it sort of connects you to your body in very visceral ways, in almost pre-linguistic ways, and that's sort of the essential human nature of how we know the world. So yeah, I think that's why arts are important. And your second question was?
Yeah. So
I got carried away in the first question.
no, it's okay. I think those were some very important points to make. I just think that when we realize that arts is a way of passing down tradition, we just keep forgetting that part. And one thing that I also observed and noticed is that during this pandemic, everybody has turned to arts to keep themselves sane and mentally capable, because it is extremely stressful being stuck in the house, not being able to step out, socialize. Particularly if you're alone in the house and you have nobody to interact with, another soul to interact with, arts have been your only solace. You have gone to Netflix, Amazon, you name it. You all have watched series. These are all art forms. They're all different ways of promoting and propagating. And this is how arts helps and takes care of the society that it thrives in.
Yeah, but I think arts are also, yes, there is self-care, but there is also community memories. So if you look at historically, the first thing that oppressive regimes have done is burn books, remove arts, ban artists, stop music, stop dance. It's because communities remember who they are, where they came from, what they stand for, through these mediums, and they're far more powerful than, because they're affective. You're designed in your DNA to connect to other people through these forms of communication. And so Hitler burnt books, he banned paintings, and he banned dancing and music. And why ban the artist if they're not important? But what they carry, what the repositories that arts carry, are far more valuable than, and therefore historically far more dangerous to oppressive regimes. And that's why it's important to understand what the arts do, then not just entertainment. Yeah.
Wow, those are some really useful insights for anybody who's still questioning what the role of arts is. But having said that, the second part of the question was this divide that we experience as artists, as performers, when we are on stage versus when we are off stage. The idea of feeling something as a human being in reality versus what you're expressing or promoting or even presenting on stage as a performer. What are the ways in which we can find ways of bridging that gap, or maybe just uh, weaving them together, if not bridging the gap?
I think um, what we sometimes lack in our training is the training and grounding in criticality. If we a training and grounding in criticality, and an understanding that our traditions are evolving systems. Uh, if we look at tradition, or if we look at any technique, call it a painting technique or a theatrical technique or a musical technique, language, a skill, those skills have evolved with time to respond to the current moment. So if you look at the English language, while it has such a long history, it has evolved to keep pace with the way world is changing. It has also evolved and absorbed other influences and cultures across the world. So English in India doesn't sound like the English in England anymore. It is not, the words are not the same, the inflections are not the same, the phonetics are not the same, but it's still English. There's still some, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that the disconnect happens when we deify dance forms or art forms. And there is a sense of preservation rather than conversation. So a fossil in a museum is preserved as it is. There is no change, no outside elements are expected to touch it. It's kept in this bubble, a vacuum, so it doesn't change in any way from the way that it was found. Because the arts inhabit the human body, they and the human body is an unstable archive. That's another thing that I work with. It's an unstable archive, which means it is linked to the mortality of the human body. It'll change every time. Even if I pass it on, if I was to teach you something, if you learned a dance from me, your body, it'll filter through your bodily experiences. So it has already changed. It's never like a replica. And what we do not allow is enough critical engagement with tradition so that it continues to tell certain stories in the past, but allow the past to make sense of the present. We don't allow that to happen. We don't allow that porosity uh, for the past to fold into the present, to impact the future, to imagine a future in our present. So it's almost as if time is linear, but it isn't, right? Time is not linear. But this disconnect, I realize, happens because we uh, also, because of this fossilizing agenda, we tend to take on a certain role when we go onto the stage. I cannot be the critical activist citizen I am outside. I cannot be on the traditional dance stage because the form in which we have decided to preserve that art form does not allow for that, because that was not the priority, that was not the social structure at the time that this form emerged. But I'm not allowing it to grow, and that's why I think that bubble exists. There is also this anxiety that if we allow the real world questions to percolate into dance spaces, particularly classical dance spaces, then somehow we will lose our tradition. uh, Sometimes something will be lost. And I don't think so, because, let's look at what we call the epics, right? The Ramayana, the Mahabharata, or look at any epics that have survived across uh, the world. They survive because they continue to make sense. There is something that you can draw in the contemporary world from them. They are epics because they continue to be open to interpretation to the current world, and that even today I can find something of relevance that is a from something that was written 2000 years ago. And that something that has survived for 2000 years through so much change is unlikely to get diminished or disappear. It's way too strong for that. It's a worldview that cannot disappear, but it has to be a worldview that I can, it has to be a lens that I can use to look at the world today. And if I refuse to allow myself that, if I operate from that insecurity, then yes, the discontinuous and the distancing of your real self from your stage self will continue. I don't know if that makes sense.
uh, some quite interesting conversational points there. I think I picked up that we have to always let the arts evolve in itself, and keep up with the current times, because that's extremely important, and that's how arts thrive and survive. They talk about the current, they analyze the past, they even sort of are a mirror for what's happened in the past, so that we don't repeat our mistakes as well in the future sometimes. So those are all ways in which arts survive. So I think I find it interesting that you pointed out, and useful as well to repeat it for anybody who's listening, that it's important to allow yourself to change the form. I'm not saying completely change the structure, but yes, of course, make changes, make additions wherever you think it makes sense to you. And you have to understand that any art form, even if it's dance, when it's embodied, it has its own meaning, it develops its own language, and the language varies from each person, excuse me,
Yeah.
because the body is embodying, the way of method of embodying and the presentation, all of it varies from each person. I think those are some very interesting points to make and definitely worth considering, because as a dancer myself, I am personally struggling with that notion too. And where do you draw the line, what are the questions, and to what extent are you allowed to make changes to the form? And all of these questions are constantly there running in my head as well. And I think this is a question that we're going to keep asking ourselves for a while now. But it's definitely good to start a conversation on this.
Right.
I have a slightly different question now coming forward, which I think comes from the fact that you've done your master's in teaching dance and your current PhD is in dance studies. So I just want to know how you're integrating whatever research you're doing and putting it in the context of the Indian classical dance forms. So I know that you're also trained in Odissi. So I'm sure you have, like, you're doing something there. I just want to know what.
So, if I was to specifically talk about my research and my work in the last couple of years, I'm interested in the pedagogical aspect of dance training, particularly classical dance training. And by pedagogical aspect, I mean, how do we teach what we teach? What are the implications of what we teach and how we teach? And how does teaching dance in different spaces open up things for either dance or the spaces themselves? uh, so it's place, I'm interested in a place conscious, context conscious teaching of dance. Um, and so my research primarily moves around this idea of, when I say how do we teach, as in what is it that is important to teach in classical dance forms. Now, that the answer to that question changes if you're in school, if you're in a liberal arts university, or if you're in a conservatory space, right? So then space becomes important, because then that also contribute. And then who is learning? Why would you learn it? What are the ethics of teaching? Um, um, uh, so that sort of is sort of my space. Interested in a lot of learning theory comes to us from an a Euro-American understanding of learning and Euro-American contexts and research. And I have had, like I said earlier, a very close uh, a guru shishya relationship with my teacher for many, many, many years. And there are many things about teaching that I realized I implicitly learned from him. So one of my research interest is also to make explicit what I know implicitly about teaching dance, but also to see that how, there's something that a traditional dance learning process has that has allowed dance to survive for so many years. So clearly, there is something that works there. But as recent events have shown, the Guru Shishya Parampara is problematic in many, many, many ways as well. So my work basically revolves around how can a traditional dance training system talk to contemporary educational theory to arrive at a culturally contextual specific way of learning dance that does not uh, so it's not a blind importing of ideas from the West, but it's not also uncritical following of traditional pathways. Where can the two meet, and how can that contribution be productive and useful to the students, in because they inhabit this, also this contemporary world which is so interconnected. Um, so how can my dance pedagogy today be relevant to the intersubjective identities of my students, of myself? um, so that's sort of my broad research work, yeah. But I'm also interested in stories that dance teachers have to tell. So forever, I've all of education data in this country ignores the dance teacher. The dance research ignores the dance teacher. So the dance teacher in school for me is a very interesting person, and a person with great amount of agency, because I feel that's also the person that is the first point of introduction to a lot of urban children to what we call traditional or folk dance forms as well, um, to what we call cultural memory. So that these teachers, to my mind, are cultural workers, but and they're the first point of any introduction that an urban child in a metropolis like Delhi would have to, the cultural memories of different people in this country, or embodied memories, and those are the most underrepresented in um, all research, policy making, all of that. And so that is also my area of interest, to um, bring those stories to the fore.
Quite an interesting conversation there. I'm going to dig deeper into it. Of course, I'm going to find out more about it as well, interacting with you off camera when this conversation is over. But I think those are some very interesting points that you've made. Very important things to discuss, and I think we as a generation, particularly mine, if I must say, and the generations, that are coming forward, are definitely asking some very serious questions, questions that are relevant, needed, and also must be looked into as areas of improvement and maybe scope for research. So I just before I end this discussion, and I, of course, I could go on forever talking to you about this. You and I know we can continue doing that.
Yes.
But due to shortage of time, I'm going to have to end this here. But before we leave, is there anything that you would want to tell the artists who are pursuing dance and who are intending or interested in continuing their, pursuit of dance in the future? Anything that you would like to say to them, and maybe, just maybe, encourage them to take up research in the field of dance as well?
um, when people ask me, why do you do research, having been a performer for so long, get on the stage, get into costume, do the same thing again. And I'm like, yes, I did that for a while, but I feel that the work I do now, dance gave me a lot. It has given me I mean, I really can't quantify how dance shapes me and makes me. And I want to give back to the field. uh, I don't want to, as a performer, I felt I was just taking and taking and taking for personal growth, for personal glory, for personal name and fame and money or whatever, right? And I did feel that it gave me so much that I want to give back. What can I do so that the place and the field becomes larger, bigger, more inclusive, more welcoming for more number of people to find the joy that I did. I want to give back. I want to make it uh, possible for others who come behind me to not have the same struggles that I did, of not knowing what to do. So I feel that if you're a performer, it, and if you love your field enough, um, it's you never stop being a performer. You never do, right? It never goes out. It's just how you what your relationship with your field changes. And I do believe that the, this idea of scholarly academic engagement with dance increases the depth, longevity, and spread of what you can do with your form, of what you can do with your art form. Uh, it also allows you a certain kind of freedom, um, to take the risks that sometimes, as a performing artist in the market, you cannot take. I remember very early on, I remember telling myself, you know what, I want to have the capacity to say no. I don't want to do this program. I don't want to do this show. I don't want to work with this organizer. I wanted to have the capacity to say no. And if you're making your living with just performance, I know how hard that is to do that. What academia and academic research and in dance gives you is a much larger playing field. It does not mean it takes away the capacity. This is a very wrong understanding that people have, that you have to stop being a dancer. Uh, Dancers with PhD are a norm world over rather than uh, a anomaly. Like, I'm people say, "Oh, you're a dancer. Why do you need a PhD?" I said, "Well, it's not an abnormal thing to do that. You will see big scholars in dance studies who run their own dance companies, who make a difference in the industry from the inside by engaging in scholarly academic activity, which gives them the freedom from the market in some ways. It gives them the vocabulary and the tools to change the field from the inside. So continue to be a performer, uh, do what you love. But if you love it enough and you see something wrong with it, uh, what should I say? Enable yourself with tools to
Empower.
make the field, empower yourself with tools to make the field better for those who come after you. That's the service you can do to the field if you love it enough. That's all I have to say.
I think that's a lot. I wouldn't put that down. I do remember, I want to add it here as just a side note and like the before we end the conversation. That Adya also believes that performance is not something that you do on stage. It's also something that happens off stage in your spaces wherever you are. So you're a performer, whether you're a scientist, you're a advertiser, you're into advertising agency, you're I don't know, CA, whatever your role you take up, you're performing at every stage of your life. And Adya believes, and I think I agree with you as well on that note, that you cannot take away the performance aspect from a human being out of their lives because you are performing different roles and hence you are performing at every point of time in your life. So never assume that performance is something that is separate and has to happen only on stage. It is also happening on off stage. So even if you become an academician, if you become an academic person, you are still performing. Um, and on that note, I'm just going to say thank you so much for doing this with me. I think I have
It's
learned
a
a
pleasure.
lot. I have learned a lot as well in during this 1 hour of conversation, and I think there's so much that we are going to take forward as well. I'm hoping to have another set of conversation with you in the future, where we can dig further into the conversation and bring out more elements and things to explore and talk about. Um,
Sure.
and yes, please do your PhD soon. I would love to read your thesis. I also want to know how you can bring in this aspect of Guru Shishya Parampara and the contemporary way of teaching in the schools and other spaces together to make a beautiful amalgamated mix of, teaching, learning, skills, and tools. So I think that would be a very interesting piece of paper to read and, explore and understand. So thank you so much for doing this. Adya is available for any further questions. She's always, open to helping and, answering questions as much as she can. So I'm going to put out a little bit of a detail of who she is and what she does in the description box below. We will also try and find ways of staying engaged with her. So feel free to drop any comments, any questions that you may want to ask Adya pertaining to maybe your classical dance training or anything else within the field of dance. But yes, I will see you all again with the next interviewee. Thank you so much, Adya, for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning into Movement and Me, an initiative that is designed for budding artists across the world. To continue receiving notifications on our latest episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel Natya Mandalam or look us up on Apple Podcasts or Spotify for more information. I'm your host Niharika, and I'll see you all next week.